on this huge Arab summit by Dr. Chérif Amir, the Professor of Geopolitical Affairs at the University of Paris. Dr. Amir, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
First off, now, it's a big meeting between 5 Arab leaders: Egypt, the UAE, Jordan, Bahrain, and the Iraqi Prime Minister. Now, before we start delving into the trilateral connections and the details of the initiatives of these leaders, how would you evaluate and rate this, this meeting that is taking place in Al Alamein city at the North Coast?
Well, it's a sign that there is an urgency to coordinate between all the Arab countries in this region. We all know that the geopolitical situation in the Middle East and in the international arena also is very volatile now. If there will be no coordination, I think that many things will be heading to a dangerous path. So I think that the fact that President Sisi decided to gather all these Arab leaders, that means that there is an urgency to find a common policy towards what is going on in the Middle East about many topics, many security topics especially, and about also the economic situation in this region, because we all know that the Middle East now is the hub of energy and is under pressure from the West and also from Russia. And they are trying to, the Arab countries, trying to find a midway between both superpowers.
Yes. Well, before we start talking about the 5 altogether, putting aside the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain now, Egypt, Jordan and Iraq have met since March 2019 about 4 times. Now, talking about those 3 countries, I mean, March 2019, that's even before the coronavirus pandemic, before the Ukraine-Russia conflict. What really binds especially those 3 Arab countries? What sort of interests in terms of economic interests or political interests that binds those 3 countries for them to actually meet 4 times since 2019? Also, President Sisi went there to Baghdad in 2021. Which is one of the first, one of the very few Egyptian visits to Baghdad recently.
Well, the first topic is fighting terrorism. Iraq, we all know what happened during the 2014 attack of the Islamic State Daesh. We all know that this country was hit by severe attacks from numerous groups, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, other affiliates, groups from Iran also.
Yes.
And the same thing with Jordan. Jordan was also on the front line, the war against the Islamic State organization. So we all know that in these 2 countries are in the same trench with Egypt in fighting terrorism. We have to acknowledge that we all need, 3 states, we need coordination on the level of expertise, coordination in the info, because this war is about the war against terrorism. It's about information. When you get the information, you know from where the finance begins, to which branch, and what are the levels of these attacks. So I think that our security and intelligence services of 3 countries should always work together around the clock. And the fact that it's always trilateral summit, that means that there is a very important organization between the 3 countries on the highest level, because it's a question of sustainable, let's say, sustainable security for the country. Jordan is fighting terrorism, and we all know about Egypt. Of course, we're fighting terrorism since 2011 now, And we are fighting it on the Libyan front. We're fighting on the eastern front in Sinai, and we're fighting it also in the sea, because we all know they're trying to infiltrate Egypt by all means. So these three countries should organize their ranks. They should work together. Another topic is the electricity. We have many projects between Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq. Egypt is providing and selling electricity to both countries, as we are doing with Lebanon also. So I think that this is a vital issue, because electricity is very important to all these countries, especially Iraq and Jordan, because of the population, the uprisings. It could cause many problems in these countries. Both countries are in a fragile way. So they want always the commodities, the electricity, the water, all the supplies be always prepared. So we have to help these leaders to confront all these challenges, because, for example, if the electricity goes out in any of these countries, you could have the next day uprisings in the streets, and people will, and other external forces will use that against these governments. So we have to help them to be prepared always, and to repel any interference from outside their countries.
Yes. Well, there has been a lot of agreements and cooperation, as you've said, in terms of energy, agriculture, infrastructure. Now, you've explained how we are helping Jordan and Iraq, and you've talked about the cooperation in terms of intelligence and information, especially in combating terrorism. What are they adding or giving or putting on the table for Egypt?
Well, as I said, the info. First of all, we all know that Daesh started from Iraq. And we all know that the first country that literally fell under the grip of Daesh was Iraq. So we know that unfortunately, after the U.S. invasion in 2003, we all know that this country lost a lot of its security capacity. So all the terrorist groups go there, and they work there, and they start from there. So we need the info. We need the information. We need to work with these countries. If we will leave Iraq in the hands of Iran, it will be a huge strategic loss that we cannot afford. So we have to work with the government there to ask them to provide us with the info, provide us also with, let's say, the expertise, because they fought terrorism also on many levels. Jordan, well, they are helping us in containing any problems between Israel and the Palestinians. So we have to be both Egypt and Jordan working on it. We are working with the Gaza Strip and Hamas, and this is a huge problem. We have to always deal with it. And in the same time, Jordan is working with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. So we have to be two sides working together on this issue, especially that we know that there is still on the table for the Americans the confederacy to create a confederal state between the Palestinians and Jordan, which means killing the peace process or the Palestinian cause. So this would not be a good idea strategically for Egypt. So we have to work with the Jordanians to endorse them and tell them also. So what they are giving us their aid in containing the Palestinian cause, that it would not collapse.
Well, Jordan as well is cooperating with Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, and the three of them have launched an integrated developmental initiative, partnership for sustainable economic development that was launched in Abu Dhabi, worth $10 billion. Now, how can those three countries in specific really maximize the benefit of launching a huge $10 billion worth initiative to achieve a certain level of sustainable economic development, and sustainable development is the name and the language of the game right now?
Well, we all know that Iraq is a fertile land, and they have agriculture products, and we could exchange with them. By the way, both Egypt and Iraq, we are facing the same threats about the water. We have the problem with the Renaissance Dam with Ethiopia, and they have the problem with the dams of Turkey. They're trying to literally destroy the Euphrates and to destroy their economic and agriculture products. So we are working together so we could have more projects very sufficient to ensure the security of our populations, the food security. Same thing for Jordan. We always hear in the news that there are some places, provinces in Jordan where there are uprising because there is no commodities there, no more supplies. So we have to help the government there of King Abdullah II to have economic projects with their neighbors, because unfortunately they only have few places where they could have a fertile land. So we are working with Jordan also to help this country economically, because if not, the consequences will be very, very hard for all of us. So investing is very important now. And I know that we are, the three countries, especially Iraq and Jordan, are going through a very tough time economically. And we are doing the same thing. We're going through tough times, and although you look at Europe, it's doing very bad now. So I think if you will invest every penny now in these projects, it's time to do it, because we all know what we went through in 2011 was disastrous, and we don't want to repeat it anymore.
Yes. So later on, Bahrain joined those four countries, and mainly Egypt and Jordan and the UAE. Now, Bahrain attended the Second High Committee for Industrial Development and Partnership in Cairo. Now, Bahrain is known for its aluminum ores, the iron, all of these really essential raw materials. What can Bahrain offer for these sort of countries and the partnership amongst these countries?
Well, it's very important that we make Bahrain economically developed in the Middle East. That it won't be only, let's say, an island of oil and raw materials. No, we have to help them to export. We have to help, because we know that this country specifically, Bahrain, is being strangled by Iran, and they're trying to diminish the power of the kingdom there. They're trying to, once again, uprisings, to instigate uprisings with the Shia population. So the tunnel that will help us rescue this country is the economic development. We have to have our projects there, and their projects come to Egypt also, and in Arab countries. So this island won't be isolated and in the hands of Iran. So of course they have a lot to give us, and we also have the working people who could go there and work there. So the population there will be always within the Arab Sunni sphere. So I think that we have to work on the economic level to ensure that these countries will be safe, and we would not let any outside insurgency destabilize the country or just instigate any violence there that would harm the governing hierarchy there.
Mm-hmm. So these 5 countries, they are all having initiatives, economic cooperations, investments, and in a way it is influencing the political nature of these countries domestically and regionally as well. Now, would it be, I mean, is 5 a good number for such an inter-Arab cooperation and initiatives, both economically and politically, or would you like to see more countries joining in? Or if more countries are joining in, would there be some sort of a danger or a risk of really diluting the effect of this whole cooperation, especially economically?
Well, if we speak about the Gulf states, the more we have countries, it will be very good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's true, because they have less population and they have also the economic means. Why not the Sultanate of Oman? They could join, and we all know that the Sultanate of Oman does not regard, or it regards itself as Switzerland of the Middle East politically. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that they are neutral. We're not asking them to join any military or diplomatic alliances. We're just exposing the case of all these countries who need economic aid. Mm-hmm. So I think that Oman could be a very important player there. I'm not mentioning Saudi Arabia because we all know that Saudi Arabia now is also facing tough times concerning the pressure from the United States and Europe and Russia for the oil production. So we should leave them alone for a while now. Mm-hmm. Until they settle all that. So I think that the Emirates were present. Why not the Sultanate of Oman? Kuwait, they have some internal problems. They're trying to deal with them. So I think, and well, Qatar, I don't know what's really going on in their minds now, but let's wait and see. So I think that more countries could join, and it will be very helpful. I was really, it was really something that was really weird that Lebanon was not invited, because Lebanon needs huge help. Mm-hmm. But I think that the fact that the political situation there is still unstable is not giving the assurances to the leaders to sit down with Michel Aoun and other, and the Prime Minister Mikati also, and to talk about the economic aid. Mm-hmm. So Lebanon has a special case also. It needs help. But I think that the fact that Hezbollah is very present, that the situation is very tense there, maybe this, I join you at the point that it could destabilize the situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing the 5 countries have agreed on was the first phase of the $10 billion initiative. More than about 12 major projects worth about $3.4 billion. Now, the second phase will include investment and cooperation in the fields of chemicals, plastics, textiles, all these things. Now, are all these initiatives and projects a long-term goal? Are they long-term projects, or are they projects that we will actually bear the fruit of right now? Are these projects that will help us come out or deal with the Ukraine-Russian conflict, or are these much more longer-term?
Well, it depends. If it's the agriculture, it will be longer term, because we don't, for example, for the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the problem that we have is the grains. And I think that we don't have the possibility to exchange it now between us. Every country is keeping its own products for itself. But in other things, I think that we could help each other in some small trades. This could be done immediately. There is a main problem is the currencies of these countries, especially Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq, that we are trying to work hard to withstand the storm, the international storm. For example, today, the dollar has surpassed for the first time since 20 years the euro. And this was a huge blow to the EU today. So I think that we have to work to strengthen our monetary systems and choose the fastest way to ensure this cooperation. Because yes, for the long term, it's very good, but still, let's not forget that we have around the clock changes in all the world, changes in the geopolitical situation. The superpowers are playing a huge game that will rematch all the world again. So it's a real, I don't want to say world war, but let's say world storm that we are part of it.
So is inter-Arab cooperation, economic cooperation, really a solution to sustain some sort of economic activity and economic development, especially at a time where a lot of the Western countries, the Americas or the Far East are maybe a little bit hesitant to sign a lot of cooperation agreements or investments during a time of economic crises as a result of the COVID and the Ukraine issue?
There are huge problems now in Europe, and they are the most trusted investors that we could work with now, especially in Germany. They are waiting for the winter. They're saying that the next winter will be very tough. So if they are really in a shaky position, I think that we should not be very optimistic now about the situation. We should be very cautious. We have to work around the clock to ensure that even if there will be no investments from the EU in the coming months, we could have our investments here between the regional countries. I think that the Emirates, we didn't mention the Emirates. We need investors from the Emirates, because if there won't be German investors because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, or French or British, let's say that we could have the alternative, and the alternative is Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And I think this is what made Egypt's policy very smart from the beginning, that we worked from the beginning working with all the Arab countries and the regional countries and the African countries, because we have put in mind that one day maybe Europe won't be able to invest. And apparently we are heading towards this point. So I think that Egypt is leading the Arab world in spreading this awareness that we cannot depend anymore on the EU. You have seen what's going on there. If we want to work together, and this is what President Sisi used to tell the youth in the conferences, if you want to build your own countries, no one will come and build it for you. So it's the same thing now. Europe is not, it has its own problems. Their economy is very shaky now. Russia is playing a very smart game now. We have good relations with the Americans also, so we can, it's very difficult for the whole Middle East to side only with Russia. We have our heart with Russia, but our brains are with the United States.
Yes.
So it's a very difficult task for all these leaders now.
Well, if Europe is bracing for winter, shouldn't Egypt be an alternative for energy now? I mean, we're very known and established now in the liquefaction of natural gas. We have the Zohr gas field. We have our agreements with Cyprus and Greece. So as winter approaches, shouldn't Egypt be a good alternative for energy and natural gas, especially that we are trying to be established as a major energy hub?
Well, as you said, we are trying. We didn't achieve this point. Now, why? Because we just began exploiting our energy resources since when? 10 years ago. And this was very hard for us because we had to settle the compromises with our neighbors. We know that Turkey is trying to harass us. We are trying to organize also. There is a huge dispute between Lebanon and Israel concerning the Lewis-and gas field in the Mediterranean. So the situation is not very easy to export, as people think that everyone is asking, we have all these fields, why we don't do it right away? No, it needs very slow process that you will make all compromises. And let's not forget something very important. We do not want to anger also our friends in Russia. And they want, let's be frank, the Western Front wants us to go into this trap and to tell the Russians, well, we don't need you anymore, we can replace the Russians, and then our strategic relations with Moscow will be very, very, very fragile at that time. And we don't wish to see that. So we have to calculate very well the situation. We won't replace Russia with the sanctions. We have to be very aware that the Russians are waging a huge war with the gas fields. And if we go into this war, that means that you are facing the Russian bear. And we don't need this now.
Yes. Well, one thing Egypt is excelling at is actually its exports to Bahrain, Jordan and Iraq. Now, it recorded an increase in the Egyptian exports to those three countries in the first half of the fiscal year 2021-2022. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Egypt's exports to the three Arab countries, Bahrain, Jordan and Iraq, have increased in 2021 and the first quarter of the fiscal year 2021-2022. According to the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, CAPMAS, a report issued said Egypt's exports to Bahrain hit $450.7 million in 2021 compared to $139.3 million in 2020, which is an increase of 223.5%. On the other hand, Egypt's imports from Bahrain in 2021 amounted to $466.5 million compared to $261.7 million, an increase of 78.2%. Trade exchange between Egypt and Bahrain surged 128.7% during the previous fiscal year to reach $917.2 million, up from $401 million in 2020. According to CAPMAS, remittances from Egyptian expatriates in Bahrain recorded $104 million during the previous fiscal year, an 18.5% decrease from $127.7 million compared to the 2020-21 fiscal year. Meanwhile, remittances of Bahraini expatriates in Egypt amounted to $1.9 million compared to $1.8 million during the fiscal year 2020-2021, an increase of 1.2%. Bahraini investment in Egypt amounted to $160.4 million during the fiscal year 2020-21 compared to $174.6 million during the previous fiscal year. Meanwhile, in the case of Jordan, Egypt's exports to the Hashemite Kingdom increased during the first quarter of 2022 to $198.9 million, up 10.5% from $180 million recorded during the same period of 2021. Egypt's imports from Jordan hit $62.5 million during the first quarter of this year, up 51.2% from the $41.3 million recorded during the same period a year earlier. Trade exchange between Egypt and Jordan recorded $361.4 million during the first quarter of 2022, up from $221.3 million during the same period of 2021, which is an increase of 18.1%. The value of Jordanian investments in Egypt is estimated at $56.7 million during the fiscal year 2020-21, down from $58.4 million during the previous fiscal year. CAPMAS also published a report on trade between Egypt and Iraq. According to the report, trade exchange between Egypt and Iraq increased 14.1% in the first quarter of 2022, recording $147.3 million, up from $129.1 million in the same period last year. Egypt's exports to Iraq hit $141.8 million in the first 3 months of the year, up from $124.1 million in the corresponding period in 2021.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Amir. Now, we're talking about these cooperations among all these 5 Arab countries, and in the meantime, we're also prepping for the COP27 that will be taking place in less than 3 months from now. So, with everyone sort of from the European countries and the developed international community maybe going through their own domestic and global crises, economic ones, maybe being hesitant in terms of investment and funding other developing countries in terms of sustainable development and climate change. Do you think that inter-Arab and inter-African countries would actually be enough to really make the money allocated or the funding allocating for the developing countries enough to float?
No, of course not. We have to work with other countries, the superpowers, of course, because they have the means and they have the money to work on the sustainable energy and the green energy. But let's not forget that we have the lands, we have the solar systems, we have the water also. So this could be attractive for the foreign investment in this field. And we could show the world that we could work with other countries on these levels, that this is not the third world as they think. No, we have plans in saving energy. We have plans in saving fighting the climate change. But as I said, there is confrontation between the superpowers now, and I don't think that they are really interested now in the climate change. They are interested in wars and territories and gas fields, oil fields, stock exchange, and that's what they are doing. Our part is to tell them, well, do not neglect this part of the world, because the Middle East is not only a barrel of oil. No, the Middle East also is agriculture, it's also solar systems, it's everything that you can find if you want to work with the energy system.
Well, if we are talking about the COP27 and the climate change and sustainable development, Egypt is really working hard in this field. I mean, we're talking about producing hydrogen, ammonia, the windmills, the renewable energy as a whole. Now, do you feel that other Arab countries and other African states are exerting the same sort of effort? I mean, we are showcasing our work in terms of a green city like Sharm el-Sheikh, for instance, and the new Alamein city, a smart city, 4th generation, along with many other new cities in Egypt. Are the rest of the Arab countries, are the rest of the African states exerting as much effort to showcase this sort of work and the sort of serious intention in COP27?
I think that we are giving the good signs to the whole world with these cities. They can come and see by their own eyes Sharm el-Sheikh and the new Al Ain city. They know that we have invested money in that, and when we asked for financial aid for these projects, we were not using them elsewhere. We use them exactly as we have asked it to do in the field of sustainable energy. So this gives the West also and our other investors the assurance that if they invest the money in these countries like Egypt, for example, they are investing in the right place. It's going into these projects. But it's not enough to give the first funding and then things slow down. No, we have to give more attention. We have to, in the COP27, we have to tell them that you have to work again with us continuously, because if not, everything will collapse.
Well, you've mentioned that one of the things is agriculture, and Egypt, along with some of the other 5 countries, are having their water issues.
Yes.
Now, in terms of having the economic influencing the political influence, can those 5 countries have some sort of effect on the Renaissance Dam issue with Ethiopia, or does this issue with Ethiopia need a different kind of crowd?
Well, the Emirates, they have their say in this. We all know that there is investment in Ethiopia from the Emirates, and it's very important. And it's also in the Renaissance Dam, but our brothers in the Emirates did not notice from the beginning that this could harm Egypt. That's why we are coordinating with them, because they also have their say in the investment, because the Renaissance Dam is what's the Renaissance Dam? It's just a global investment. It's not the money of the Ethiopians. So I think that this could be very important, that we have an ally, a regional ally from the Arab world that could say its word. Also concerning the rest of the countries, for example, Iraq, Jordan, and Bahrain, we all know that the case of the Renaissance Dam was brought to the UN, so we need votes. We need blocs working with us, people who are working with the Egyptian diplomacy around the clock to ensure that we have our rights. So the more you have votes, the more you give credibility to your case. And this is what we need to do right now, to gather all these countries. And of course, a country like the Emirates, they could say something to Addis Ababa about what's going on. And I'm not saying stop the funding, but at least make the pressure on the government there to slow down, or to sit on the table and negotiate with us.
Well, when those 5 countries, Egypt, the UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, and Iraq, met, they discussed a lot of issues of mutual concern, signed a lot of agreements, energy, plastics, textiles, infrastructure, all these things. What do you think is the highest on the agenda that we should be really hoping for as a result of this 5-way summit? Or is it a political one?
Regional security. Regional security. I think that countries like Iraq and Jordan, both, and Bahrain, the 3 countries, are in a very they have a very heavy burden. Bahrain against Iran, we have Jordan trying to ensure its security around the clock. Iraq is facing terrorism, uprisings, interference from Iran and from Turkey and from the Kurds also. They want their independence. So this is very fragile there. Egypt is fighting terrorism. Egypt is trying to rebuild its economy all by itself now because of the recession in all the whole world. and we have the Emirates that has a voice in the Middle East and in the international arena. So it's about security, regional security. And we all know that the Arab world has been taking us a hostage between the US and Russia in this war about oil production. Iraq is an oil production country like Bahrain. So we all know that these countries are under pressure from the US to try to neglect Russia, to take a side against Russia. And we are, if we want to work together to say to the Americans, listen to us, we will be treated as separate countries, and every country will have its own share of blackmail, so it will abandon its cooperation with Russia.
So you think that having these countries, can they create a bloc that would withstand the American influence or Russian influence or even the Iranian influence? I mean, Iran is currently in discussions to reactivate its nuclear pact with these countries. Do you think that this bloc, the core, the 5 countries, and maybe some other Gulf countries can join as well, can they withstand all these sort of influence and maybe wane the Iranian influence a little bit?
Look, every country, let's be frank, every country is working with, for example, with the file of Iran differently. For example, Bahrain wants security and armed forces working around the clock fighting with them. Look, for example, the Emirates started negotiating with Iran because they said, well, we have to have a diplomatic approach. Iraq, it's very critical because of the Shia and the presence of Iran there. Like the Sadr movement, they have the uprising until this hour now. So this is very important. And we have Jordan, who is threatened also by Iran and needs support from a country like Egypt. This is very critical. And we have to work diplomatically and politically and on the military level also.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a big meeting between the leaders of Egypt, manifested and present is Sisi, also the UAE, the Jordan, Bahrain, Iraq, all these countries gathering in the new Alamein city. We're going to be following up on the developments and the outcomes of such a huge summit. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Chérif Amir, the Professor of Geopolitical Affairs at the University of Paris. Dr. Amir, always a pleasure having you with us on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on NILE International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.